Hello, everyone.
We've got a few people joined us just now. Welcome to the AUSMAP Communities webinar. You're all probably on mute right now because I've just set it up so that you'll be on mute when you join in, and you can set up your video to be on if you like. Yeah, and what we'll do is we've got Scott here and Tony as well, and Michelle's dialing in from Adelaide. So we'll do the presentation, and if you like, just keep on mute while we're presenting, and then we can save time for questions at the end. And Michelle's done a beautiful presentation with lots of questions in there for you all to contribute. If you have a look, you can see there's a section where it says chat on your screen. So if you want to just write down your questions in the chat, and then at the end we can go through them and answer them all. Also, if we don't have time to answer all the questions, we can definitely come back to you another time as well, because we'll save the chat. So don't worry if we do miss your questions, we'll come back to you. And why don't we all just have a little practice now in the chat room and just write down your name and where you're from and say hi to everyone. Everyone will be able to see as you start typing in there. So feel free to do that. Okay, and there is another little function possibly, I can't see it on mine, but you can raise your hand somehow. So feel free to do that if you want to raise your hand and ask a question at the end, and then we can also then know that you're trying to ask a question. Just when we have lots of people trying to speak at once, it might be difficult. Some people might cut each other off. So if you don't get a chance straight away to ask your question, just raise your hand and I'll try and figure out how to find you in there. So welcome. For those just joined us, just jump in the chat room and add your name in there. And I'm just going to start sharing the screen now so you can see Michelle's slides.
Oh, there we go.
There's Michelle. We're just going to mute ourselves now, Michelle, and I'll...
Okay, so you can still hear me though when I need to click, nod. Yes, okay. Okay, well, first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for everybody that's come along to our webinar this evening. Our first of many, I hope. And I'd like to also just thank, first of all, Alicia from Northern Beaches Council, but also as one of the tribes people from the Northern Beaches for helping us to organise this event. Very much to all the wonderful volunteers that are involved in the program. Far and wide. We're very happy with everyone, and it's just been such an amazing year. So I look forward to sharing, we look forward to sharing some of our results with you. Excuse my attire, I have my wonderful Santa top on, which is very, I can see Bill's face smiling there. Yes, very amusing in my Santa outfit. So Alicia, just the next slide, please, if you can hear me. Click. Yeah, there we go. So before we go any further, we'd just like to acknowledge also the traditional custodians upon whose ancestral land we live and work, particularly in the waters that we all work on. We pay respect to the elders past and present and emerging, and acknowledging the continuing connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have to the land, sea, sky, and particularly our waterways, which is where we're at today. So thank you very much. Next one. So what we're going to do today, though, we've got, as Alicia explained, for those newbies that have come on board too, sorry, I'm just going to mute which I was the one that didn't mute, of course. There we go. These are some of the things that we're going to talk about today in our webinar, or our, round around the nation talk today. We're going to talk about the goals that AUSMAP had set originally and what we've achieved so far. Officially, we launched in July last year, so we'd like to share with you some of those results to date, and explaining to you where this has taken us and how the data is being used, particularly for management in different areas, and what our plan is from here on in. And most importantly for today, it's very important for us to gauge and get some feedback from you. So with any questions you might have, and so that's where the chat comes in. Write questions down, that way we can keep sharing it and we can go back to it at the end. So feel free to go ahead from that as well. Alicia? All right, so just going through the phase 1 goals. So phase 1 was basically last July, which is when we officially launched, through till September this year. So we had the methodology that was approved and trialed and tested. If you can hear my dog snoring in the background, I really apologize. He's on the floor here. Can you hear him? Snoring. So sorry about that. We developed the field kit to a scalable price that was suitable for everybody. And thanks to Kylie in particular for managing that side of things. I know it hasn't been easy. We've had, our plan was to distribute 40 kits around the country, run in that first 12 months, 12 activation events, and design the database that was going to be used to make sure it was functional. So that's been done in the last 12 months. Next slide there. Oh. There we go. We plan to, some of the goals that we had achieved as well, we plan to train at least 50 individuals, engage 30 education centres, survey to around 200 beaches, involve at least 500 participants, and try and get at least 7,000 students involved in doing the program around Australia. Have we achieved those goals? Just about, and we'll explain that in a little while. We've up to about 180 odd beaches, so we're very, very close. Almost 200, and at last count about 3,500 students. It's taken a slightly different field. We've engaged a lot more community than that as well, and also individuals trained. So we've certainly, exceeded our expectations with the goals for the first phase. Next one there. So there we go. Alicia's trying to click forward. Trying to. There we go. You can just, they didn't click through them all. So of those 12 events that we had planned, or we had in our milestones, we've actually completed 26 around the country. We just distributed 80 kits around the country. We've created 30 hubs in every coastal state and territory. We've trained over 480 people, which is really amazing, with about 145 odd organisations involved. We've done at least 20 community days, 9 corporate events, and we've presented, mainly Scott, but we've presented at 12 conferences, both nationally and internationally. So that's really exciting. As I said, we've got close to 3,000 people involved. And considering that was just in a 12-month period, that equates to well over 2 or 3 events every month in that first year. So, and most of you that were here were involved in some part or another in that, which is fantastic. Next slide. So just one thing that we'll just sort of pause on and just go over again was when we have assigned the roles and responsibilities for the different hubs, we're just going to revisit that. We've developed a hub agreement form, and most of you have been very kind enough to assign that and send that back to Kylie. That is just to gauge people's details and where they're going to sample around Australia. The key part of being a hub is to coordinate sampling and liaise with different groups within your region. Undertake ideally 4 sampling at the one site per year. And I know that is sometimes a little difficult when you're involved with a community group and it might be different locations. But the reason we try and get 4 per site is so that we are able to then look at seasonal variation as well. It's really critical though with any of these events, whether it's a community event, a school event, or small or large, is to let us know when those events are taking place, what has been collected. Even if it's a big fat zero, it's still a very important part of our program to record where the samples are being taken, and then to upload that data and that information to us in terms of the site assessment form, which now has a new part to it to capture the participants, the number of participants involved, and the location of exactly where you are. And uploading that data to us, including the macro debris that we then send on to Tangaroa Blue. It's very important for us to get hold of those microplastic samples, sending to Scott at Macquarie or to the AUSMAP office in Sydney. A key part of being a hub is to have hold of that free kit that we distributed and make that available for loan to those people that have been involved in the training, might be involved in another community group, and then submit to us ideally those evaluations capturing what people liked about the program and may not have liked, which are all available on our website, and all you as trained leaders in the program have access to that website in that resource section, and in there also is all the training videos as well. We have specified as well in when we're doing the training initially that trained leaders are then able to provide training to other interested groups. However, I will point out that any training undertaken by you guys as leaders won't be accredited to those doing the training furthermore. That accreditation can only be done with an official AUSMAP training course. But you are able to then show the program to other people and build on this citizen science project as well. If there are any questions about any of this, jot them down and we can come back to that later on. Next slide, there we go. All right, so this shows the training regions approximately for where we've been. As you can see, most of the trainings have taken place down in New South Wales and in South Oz. Obviously, as I'm based over here in South Oz now. We have been undertaking quite a bit though in Queensland. We are part of the Tangaroa Blue Reef Clean project. And most recently, we did some sampling up on Thursday Island with Tony. Thank you very much for coming to help. And we did Friday Island, Thursday Island. There is a Wednesday Island, but we didn't go there. And also Goods Island. I'll talk about what we're about to embark on in the next 12 months or 8 months as well in just a moment. Next slide. Okay, so what we had developed as well, which we would love feedback on, is 2 sort of options for the training days. We've developed these survey worksheets that are available for school groups and for communities, and there's one also for mangroves. And that can be sort of integrated into any program. I know that Tony at the Coastal Environment Centre has integrated it very well. Also Glenn Glenn Halliday from Observatory Hill. But I'd love some feedback as to whether your organisations have been using this. And also next slide there, please, Alicia. There's also the complete units of work for geography and science. Now, I know these are based around the New South Wales curriculum, and when as I've explained to many of you along over the last year, Kate was going to be here to talk about this tonight, but her house is under threat of fire again, so she can't be with us. Hopefully all remains well there. As I said, most of this is linked to the New South Wales curriculum. However, we have tweaked the geography to ensure that it matches the Australian curriculum. But these programs can be integrated to any key learning areas for 7 to 12. And I know that the younger years are also using this as well. So again, any feedback into this would be most welcome. Okay, so while that's all fresh in your mind, we won't take the questions now. Let's come back to that, Bill. I've got your question there. Kylie may not have seen that. It's just, yeah, we'll come back to that about Tangaroa Blue. I think the question was that we enter it, or we'd love you to still enter it as an organisation when you do the program. But we would like a copy of that as well, because it's really important for us to get that relationship between the big and the small that's being collected. And if any of you have tried to get that data out of Tangaroa Blue, again, it's quite difficult. So it's really ideal that we get a photocopy, like a photograph, and scan and email back to us a copy of that Tangaroa Blue as well. Okay, hope that answers your questions. Okay, so we're going to go on to some of the methods. I think Scott is going to talk about this a little bit. We've had a few queries, and again, we'd love your feedback with how the program, in terms of the methods on the beach or on your waterway, how that's running. If we go to the next slide there, Alicia, please. And with this, we've noted a couple of things that we have had discussions about, and sort of just to get the mind thinking. Scott, do you want to have a chat about the method side? I nod that yes. So over to you, buddy.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi everyone. Yeah, as Michelle said, we've had a number of questions over the last year around various aspects to the methods and you know, about tweaking methods and things like that. It's been a really a work in progress in a sense for us as well. Being the first year, we're still kind of making those small iterations to the method. So some of the ones you can see on the screen there are common questions that have come to us. So one around the depth. So obviously we need to take that 2 centimetres of sand is important. Do you need to use a ruler to do that? If you got the kit, then you know you'll have the ruler in that. But if there's others, I know Robbie and Bill use other tools with Living Ocean. So it's really about trying to get that standard depth. So whether it's a ruler or some other device, if you're confident of getting 2 centimetres and understanding that, and for the participants to commonly get that 2 centimetres depth, then by all means we're open to other devices, other measures. Another question was, are there any issues with the sampling protocol? The sampling protocol is based on a European and EU method for marine litter. So it's based on standard methods already that are applied in the science community. We've modified it slightly to adapt it to a citizen science program. And so in terms of the rationale for it, it is based on a standard protocol that is being used internationally. So, and that's why we've kind of tried to keep it as best as we can to that method. And so all those things of why we're sampling just the strand line and using quadrats of certain sizes and the depth, for instance, are all based on those standard methods. Finding the strand line is also a common issue, and Tony might be able to talk about that as well. Because when we go out to the beach, often there's multiple strand lines, and so how do we choose where to sample? In the guidelines, we say take the high tide mark, but you know, obviously there's multiple high tide marks in some instances, and so it's the most complete line you really want to do. So you don't want one that's too old, that's been trampled on, you know. So what I say, within the last 24 hours, because we've got diurnal tides in most parts of the country, then you might have 2 or 3 strand lines to choose from. It's the most complete and the one that has the most debris. And so it's usually the highest one tends to have more than the lower one. The other thing that Tony just mentioned with her hand gesture was around when you lay out your transect tape, you're not necessarily doing it in a straight line. You should be following the contour of the beach or of that strand mark. So it will be curved like the beach commonly is. So did you want to add anything?
No.
Okay. Another thing is about the number of quadrats, and 3 is the bare minimum. Why we decide on 3 is because it gives us an average for that beach. You can do more, by all means do more if there's time, the more the better in fact. It's about getting a representation of what's there, and 3 through our kind of data shows that is the bare minimum for us to get an idea. If you can't get 3, we'll still consider it, but it might not be used in the full data set. So we understand there are time limitations with certain groups or certain pressures with the tide itself or conditions on the day. So that's, we'll take that into account, but if at all possible, please try for 3. And like we always say, try and sample when the tide, after the high tide, so you need to look at your tides, and the best time to sample is after the highest tide of the month, the spring tide, because that pushes everything up to the highest level of that beach that you're going to get in that month. So consider that if you can. We understand once again that not everyone has those luxuries, particularly with school groups. They have to just go out whenever. So we'll just take that. That's why you do the site assessment sheet. So we've got all that information as well. Is the data difficult, time consuming? Yes, in part. So can we split all that processing, all that from the data collection through the data analysis? Yes. You don't have to all do it in the one day. You can do that over subsequent days. Obviously, once all the samples need to be taken at the one time period, but after that, you can do the processing at your leisure. So if it's a school group, they can take it back to the class if they want, or if it's a community group, then they can do that whenever they have the time. So as long as we're getting the data, that's the key thing, and so it's whenever you can get to it is the key thing. I know both Tony and Glenn have done kind of revised versions where it's very much where you've got multiple groups, and this is just one part of an exercise. One exercise is part of a larger program for that day. So there's kind of shortcuts that you can do that we can also talk to you about. One of the common things is confidence. So once you're trained, people say, well, I'm still not 100% sure on how to either do it or analyse or collect or process the samples. And that's, we admit that, I've been doing it for years, and even I still kind of run into issues. So don't feel bad about that. It's just a thing. The more you do it, the more confident you become in running the program. What we'll try and do in the next year is run community events in conjunction with training days, so that people can not only do their training day, but in that same week potentially participate in another community event and get some more hands-on experience. So you can sign up if there's any community events going on in your local area.
Cool.
Methods, yeah.
There's a short question there.
Okay, which
is it for subsequent surveys at Sand Beach?
should we try to survey the exact GPS location of the previous survey where we can source the sound? Where can we, okay. So yeah, you want to, it doesn't have to be the exact same location, but the start point of your survey should be, you know, around the same area. So you should be using a marker. It could be, you know, the surf club. It could be an entranceway onto the beach, something that's not going to move readily over time. And that could be your start point in which to lay out your transect. And then within that, you remember your quadrats are randomized. So that is, yeah, so that individual point is going to be different because the height of the tide is going to be different, but the general locality should be the same, because if you sample at a different end of the beach, then there's different kind of influences, currents and wind patterns might be different than where you've done your first sample, for instance. So yes, please sample not, if you've got an exact GPS starting point, that's good, to which to start your transect. Then that can be your start point from then on. For sample vials, so if you send us your samples in little vials, we will send them back to you eventually once we've processed them. So we can, if you're short of vials, let us know, we can send them. We've got a stock of vials to send out.
And we have glass jars. You can use glass jars as well, right?
Yeah, you can use...
It's more expensive to send, but...
And some people send them in envelopes, like if they've processed and dried them out, envelopes, sealed envelopes are fine as well. So there's other means to send rather than what we've got, but we can send you vials as well. Okay.
Oh.
So let's have a look at some of the data we've collected over this year. Did we skip one?
I don't know, maybe.
So
I don't know how to go back now.
it should be up there. Was there a map?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry.
that's fine. We'll just see if we can go back. No, that's okay. We can only go one way. The only way is up. No, it was only a map of Australia which showed all the data. We've got some more maps just to illustrate that. So as you can see in that slide, we've got, well, from this data, there was over 155 data points. It's closer to 200 now, which Michelle mentioned since we've done this. Most are from New South Wales because that's where we kind of started and spread out from. But you can see there's different numbers from each state. We've also looked at different habitat types, although most of it is either coastal or estuarine. We do have some offshore islands, some mangrove sites, and some freshwater sites on rivers. So remember, AUSMAP is any waterway, so you can do it in a lake, in a river, wherever there's some soft sediment, and so, you know, it doesn't have to be just coastal or estuarine, and it can be done in mangroves as well. A bit more difficult, but it's definitely possible. So
yeah. There's a map.
There's a map. That might be, I don't know if it's all, yeah, okay. I don't know if you can see all the dots. So we've created a map, and at the moment it's a static map, but we're working on an interactive map that will have the data, and you'll be able to click on all the data points around Australia and zoom in to areas. And you can't really see, but what you can maybe see is some different coloured points in that map. So we've got a 5-point grading scale based on microplastic loads. We always equate it back to the amounts per metre squared. That's once again a standard reporting metric that's used in the scientific community. But you'll see some big black points. There's one in Adelaide and one in Sydney, and that is loads over 1,000 items or microplastics per square metre. The orange, and here's a close-up of Sydney and some of the beaches around Sydney. So there's a big black point there near the airports, and then red is, as you can see from the graphic, between 250 and 1,000, and then goes down from there. So what we're finding in the results so far is most of the data in our estuaries are high. So they're either orange or moderate to very high, should I say. So they're either orange through to black. And so it's really pointing out these hotspots, which is what we're trying to get to is part of the AUSMAP aims. So in Sydney, you can see there's some green spots on the coast, and what interesting we're finding in Sydney Harbour and the effluent that comes out of the harbour, or a lot of it is kind of stormwater sourced, but it's moving north up the coast with the longshore drift, so it is a northward migration. Hence the beaches to the north of Sydney are also high or moderate, although there is sources there, and Tony's been doing some work up there. So that's an example. So in the future, and we'll get to that, you'll see some of that interactive. So for the north, you'll see, so I think we've got Michael up in Gladstone or Tanham present today, but we've got some data for Queensland coast. It's generally low to very low. And so we're not finding as many hotspots, although we haven't done any around the southeast yet. That's planned for the early part of next year. And you've got little ones that you can't see. Thursday Island, maybe not, but there's some further north, there's low even. Although once again, it's seasonal. So a lot of these data points are one-off or two-off data. And so that's why we want to get some idea across the seasons to see if that changes with different times of year. Yeah. Other parts of Australia, so we've got some data from down in Tassie, and hi to people in Tassie, some from Victoria, and obviously in South Australia where Michelle is. So there's, once again, you know, we need more data points from those southern areas, and particularly around Melbourne we'll be doing, and other parts of the Victorian coast we'll be doing in the early new year. West Lakes, which is the big black spot in South Australia, is one that Michelle and the team there have been working on, and we've got quite a bit of data there. That's consistently over 1,000, and in fact holds the record for the most number of microplastics we've found so far, and that is 9,500 microplastics per square metre. So that's the beach. So this West Lakes is a small estuarine system, but it's fed by some light industrial areas. So we're finding a lot of pellets at West Lakes, as well as foam, which there's also a Westfield shopping centre on the shores, and a rowing complex or rowing centre, which has foam buoys, which may also be the source of some of that foam. So foam or pellets are the major types of microplastic we're finding there in the thousands. So over in the west, we've done a few down in the southwest and Fremantle and down around the Margaret River region. Once again, moderate to low levels, more seasonal data required. We don't have anything in the northwest of WA as yet.
To go to Ningaloo.
We'll have to go to Ningaloo, that's right. We're planning a trip in the new year to get some data up there. So most definitely. Okay, so that's kind of just broad numbers, but we're when you collect the data and when it comes back to us, we do a whole range of other processing and information gathering with that. So, so that's just to show you some beaches around Sydney and the amounts on average. So Glenn from Observatory Hill does a lot at Chowder Bay. The Strawkle group here at Manly goes out. So we've got regular data from both those sites, and Athol Beach, which is up near the zoo, is also regularly sampled. So that's Sydney. In Queensland, we can see Tannum Sands being the highest, although it's still low. So only 16 items per square metre, but it's showing us that it's very low levels. Thanks, Michael. Very low levels compared to what we're finding in say, Sydney or these larger urban areas. So it is really driven by urban inputs, more so than ocean inputs in most places. And so, although we've done Cairns and around Townsville, the levels have been low, and so we really need to do one after a big flush,
After the wet
weather events. Okay. Yes. Okay, so here's some more data from Queensland and just showing you the types. So what we also do is not only the amounts, but the types. So film, foam, hard fragments, pellets, fibres, etc. Included. And it tells us a lot about where it might be coming from, or the types of materials that we should be concerned about. So you can see Tannum Sands, Airlie and Holloway's Beach and Cairns dominated by hard fragments, so bits of plastic that have broken up over time. But interestingly, at the South Stradbroke, that's mostly, I'm trying to determine, is that fibre? I think it's fibre, yes.
Very close greens.
Yes, so a lot of fishing. I think there's a bit of commercial fishing going on around there still. So it's probably driven by ropes of various boating activities. So with some sites, we're getting quite regular data, and so this is an example of Manly Cove here in Sydney, and the changes over time. So there's a group called the Strawklers that go out every month, and they do a microplastic survey along with their Strawkle, which, if you're not familiar with the term Strawkle, it's snorkeling for straws. And other rubbish. So they snorkel around the shallows, and then a group of them also do a microplastic sample on the beach. But you can see that Manly Cove, and the initial sample was actually over 1,200 items per square metre. And it's dropped down after that. So the average now is around 200. So it's consistent. That first event was right after a big rain event. And then those other little spikes are after, minor rain events. So rain definitely influences the inputs into our systems in various locations. Should be a next slide. And so this is the same time period, the same beach, but what it's showing you is the changes in the types of plastic over that same time period. So the two top lines there, if you can make them out, the lighter blue is hard plastic fragments, and the darker blue is foam fragments. And so even though the numbers are relatively consistent after that first time period, we're seeing a swap, a change in the major type of plastics we're finding, microplastics we're finding. So you can see foam kicked in as being the highest number in around that mid-year period. This is last year, and we've actually got data for this year which shows the exact same trend. So it's consistent that around that mid-year through to almost the end of the year, it's foam dominated, and then, you know, macroplastic fragments take over. Sorry, microplastic fragments take over those other times. We also see spikes of pellets at times. So these are the industrial pellets of the nurdles popping in as well. So it tells us there's something happening either with, you know, the weather, I imagine it's a mixture of things, wind patterns, weather patterns, even activities in the local catchments or on the harbour are likely to be factors in that. So this is what the data can show you once you get enough regularity in. We're also, the other thing we're doing with the plastics that come in is looking at the contaminants on the plastics. And so through our colleagues at the University of Newcastle, they've been looking at metal contaminants and things like PAHs, PCBs and other nasty organic chemicals on the plastics that are submitted. And so we've got some data from Sydney, and basically there's 15 sites we've got, and basically every site is showing extreme levels of metal loads. So the plastics, if you're not aware, act like sponges in the environment. So they suck up all sorts of contaminants that are also floating around in the water. And so they bioconcentrate those contaminants. So what we're finding is actually quite a cocktail of chemicals on those plastics around Sydney anyway. We haven't looked at other locations, but we will in future. Okay, so if there's any further questions you have around the data, what it might help you to show, then please let us know. We can get to those towards the end. As I said, the map is a work in progress, and this is something Kylie's been working on with a contract company, Growth Ops, who are doing the work for us to put this together. You'll be able to see in the future something like this, where the dots or the points will be on the map. You'll be able to zoom in, and it'll be kind of a bit of a heat map style, but you'll then be able to click on the individual points as you zoom in, and you'll get data on, you know, the amounts, obviously the date, and then some other information on the types. We also record colour and shape as well. So all that information that you collect will go on there in a summary form. So that is a work in progress. Hopefully that will be up and running shortly.
Sorry,
yeah.
A question, but I can't get it to come back up.
Is there any
more?
There is more. Okay. So what do we do with the data once we've got it? So there's a couple of things that we are working with other agencies. So I think groups like NRM groups are interested in environmental reporting, and so, or ecosystem health report cards that some regions have, and we're working in particular in the southeast with healthy land and water, and maybe creating a metric for report carding for that. So using some of those per metre squared values as another gauge of the health of your waterway or ecosystem. We're also we've produced an annual report, but also we're working on catchment-based reporting. So where there's a lot of data for a catchment or a region, we can report on that and provide a summary of information for that region. So that's work in progress, and particularly up on the reef, we're doing that in conjunction with Tangaroa Blue. We're also working on speaking to various other industries, particularly that are interested or might be affected by plastics and microplastics, and so commercial fisheries in particular. And so whether it be fisheries, oysters, mussels. We're working with particular groups there at whether we can gauge the amount of microplastics, not only just on the shoreline, but actually in some of these biota. So that's a work in progress, but we can link to what we're finding in the fields from our sampling, from your sampling, to potential harm or risk to biota.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, so there's some interest there. And so one group in particular is up in Queensland. There's some barramundi farms, and so we're working with them potentially to get some sustainable accreditation around that. That's a photo.
Cool.
Okay, other waterway. So we've had some wins along the way. So even though we've been going for a year, we've been kind of working with local and state agencies to try and...
Sorry, the mouse is driving.
Okay.
Keep going.
As long as you're not swearing.
No swearing.
Good. So yes, we're working with local state agencies to try and get some solutions. So that's part of what we want the data to show is get that source reduction. And so as you can see in the slide there, there's 3 areas in particular that we've been working on so far. Dee Why Lagoon here in the northern beaches of Sydney has been identified as a hotspot. So when we find a hotspot, we want to get to the source of, where that is coming from. And so that's one area. Eurobodalla down around Bateman's Bay has already been responding to some of this data and installed some drain buddies. And then West Lakes, which is the big black spot down in South Australia, which, there's been both school and community groups have been doing the work down there, and thanks to those guys, because they're the ones that basically brought that to light, that West Lakes was actually, wasn't actually an extreme hotspot. And so once again, we're working with local council and EPA to resolve those issues. So I think in the next slide, we've got some examples. So this is what we've been doing in Dee Why Lagoon, and we're continuing to work in the Dee Why Lagoon in the new year as well, through an EPA grant that we got as a side. So Dee Why Lagoon is down in the bottom right in that aerial image. You can see that's a hot spot, but it drains kind of some commercial areas. The light pink in the map, or mauve maybe, is a light industrial area. And so we've been able to do some netting upstream and sampling upstream to kind of locate areas. And you can see the numbers in the table. So the first column there is what we're finding in Dee Why Lagoon by percentage of type. And then the 3 zones, the dark red is the high density residential / commercial, and the lighter red is the low density residential. And those numbers in that table are percentages, so don't worry too much. But you can see that there's certain areas, so foam is high, and the only pellets we're finding is in the industrials area, so foam and industrial pellets there, while in the high density residential commercial area you see a lot of film, so a lot of wrappers and bag fragments coming through, and then in the low density we're finding hard plastic fragments and fibres, which is interesting. So what we're showing is that each little subcatchment has its own kind of source or different types, and so that's where we're working with those local stakeholders to try and get solutions specific to that subcatchment. So that's a work in progress. Oh yeah. It's, sorry, I was highlighting things. Okay. This is, so in Eurobodalla I've been working with, and we're continuing to work with Clean Water Group who is a company that installs these drain buddies, they're called. They're drain inserts, but they're fine filtered mesh, so they're capturing microplastics as well. So we've been getting those as well, and linking what we're finding in those catch baskets to what we're finding on the beaches as well in those local areas. So once again, there's some nice links to back to source to identify where it's coming from, and then working with local government to get some further measures in place. Sometimes it's about education and awareness, and then others is actual physical measures. And then West Lakes data, here you can see West Lakes, some examples of the issues. And there's a school group out collecting on the lake in the photo. There's a lot of foam there. So foam dominates that site where they're collecting, although one of the other sites, it's a bit more even, with pellets being in the thousands. So the pellets are coming from the light industrial areas, so it's about tracking them back to source as well. So working, local government, and Michelle's been working with the state agencies and local politicians and doing her bit to try and get some action there. So that's hopefully going to come to play in the new year. Okay, so if there's any questions specifically around that, I'll just put it on the question sheet, and I'll hand back to Michelle to talk a bit more about the evaluations and the program going forward. Yep, over to you.
Over to you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Scott, for that in-depth overview of the data. Woo! But I'd like to also say thank you again to everybody that has contributed to the data collection. I know Joe and Joanna are listening over here in Adelaide, and that's their data that we're looking at, and it is so important, and it makes us realise very quickly why this program is so important, because even though around the country we have many areas that have little microplastic, which is interesting in itself, but when we can start to identify those areas where we have huge loads, and that we can start to come up with some source reduction strategies and remediation for those areas, we know that the program is successful. And that all comes back to you guys as citizen scientists, and like I said, we couldn't do it without you, so thank you once again. So hi from Susan from Bateau Bay. Hello, Susan. Thank you for coming. But so a few things that, you know, and we've got many of these. And so what we are going to do, please, we're just about to finalise our newsletter. And in there, we want to put in there a brief survey to try and gauge how we can do better and what we can do to keep you guys engaged and collecting the data over time. So some of the things that we've talked about is, you know, that we would love feedback from you either today, or if you want to snapshot this and provide us with some more information, the more the better. We can't get this program working any better if we don't get feedback from you guys that are on the ground doing it. So we'd love to know what we can do better. How do we keep you guys engaged? The leaders, I mean, you all here tonight are here because you're interested, which is absolutely fantastic, and we really appreciate your time. You know, what more can we do to keep you, you know, as I said, engaged, to continue to collect that data and send it back to us over time. Furthermore, you know, to get those feedback forms to send back to us, the evaluation, so that we can make the program better, tweak anything that's needed. I mean, this is a fantastic forum to be able to do that. Maybe next time we'll focus on maybe just the methods, or maybe just the data collection. Maybe we can do some sort of webinar such as this to sorting plastic or something like that, so we can give you more exposure to that. Because as Scott said, it comes down to confidence. And so, you know, how do we improve the amount of feedback on the sampling day by participants as well? And any other questions you've got on the program, we would love that feedback from you as well. So please send that on to us either now in the chat room or in an email, or jot some notes down or whatever as well. Okay. Next slide, please. So where to from here? We'll just give you a brief update. So phase 1 finished in September, and now we're working towards phase 2, which will take us to the end of June. We are going to be undertaking more training between now and the end of June, about 12 or so around Australia. And part of that, we will also be doing some social surveys. So we're working with a student here at Flinders University who's going to be designing some social surveys to look at the behavioural change and try and document that for both within the community and within the training programs, which will be really exciting to be able to try and do that as well. And as Scott has pointed out, we're working a lot towards, you know, trying to find the most appropriate source reduction strategies for particular areas. So in part with that, we're partnering with CBINs, which is the sort of more slow water, low movement water. Most of you have probably heard about that. So we're hoping to work with them. So that might be the most appropriate reduction strategy once it gets into the water. But before it even gets to that point, we would like to look into that a little bit more. We're going to be developing the web further as well as finalising the map. And that should be hopefully be finished by the end of next year. Sorry, next year. No, the end of this year. Sorry, Kylie, for the heart attack there. But all of this obviously comes down to having more volunteers that are engaged. As we've said before, we've trained over 450 people in the program. And as Robbie said, volunteers do come and go, absolutely. And that makes it difficult, but that's why we've developed these regional hubs and around Australia with coordinators or people that are very interested in those regions to keep that going. Tony, for example, in the Northern Beaches, as well as the guys from Living Oceans. Joe and Joanna are over here. Colleen down in Warrnambool. I mean, there's several people around Australia. Claire over in WA. There's several people around Australia, but out of the 450, we want to try and keep many of those involved. They've taken the time out to come and do the training, as have we, and so we want to try and keep those people engaged and how we can do that better. So, but I did, you know, at the end of the day, we're a non-for-profit and funding is all paramount for everybody. So that's what we're looking forward to looking into in the coming months as well. Alicia, next slide. Going to just come in, yeah. And Alicia is going to get a little discussion now for her swap for good. I'm not sure if you can, my screen's gone. Oh, so Alicia's going to swap it over to her slides for a moment. So if you've got any questions and all of that, Ali has just said to everybody, just secured 6 CBINs. Cool, at Rushcutters Bay. Absolutely, but we are also talking with CBINs about how we can actually collate what's in there as well. There's a bit of a beach there. Great, we've got a kit. Let's go and get some samples over there. That would be fantastic. So Alicia, I'll move it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Just one second. There we go. Oh, okay, so I think we're ready to go. Hopefully I can manage talking and clicking at the same time.
Do you want me to click?
No, I think it'll be okay. I might get a bit frustrated. I will try not to swear. So yeah, sorry, the battery is just a bit low on the mouse, so it hasn't been working very well. But we've managed to get through, so that's all good. Thanks, Michelle, for letting me crash your webinar with a bit about Swap for Good. I just wanted to share this as a nice little segue as a source reduction project that has now been adopted by council, basically. And this is the pitch that we give to businesses. So my role in council is to actually go out and speak to businesses. And I don't think there's many councils that do that. They kind of normally do like a community campaign where they do something that talks about what the community should do and the general public. But to be able to actually go down and chat to businesses is kind of unique. So I'm really excited to be in this role. And so we've started a thing called Swap for Good, and it's all about focusing on the positive. So yes, we do touch a little bit on the data like that we find around Manly, but then we try and really tell them like it is actually good for business to be making the swap. And businesses, like, they do want to know a bit about what's going on. I think it's important for citizen science to be presenting this data, but for someone else to then come in and say, it's not all bad, you've got solutions, we're here to help, that's really like, you know, the good cop, bad cop kind of mentality going on there. So if the shaming data still comes out of the woodworks, then great. But basically our program is all about inspiration and empowerment and trying not to go too much into the shame of this mess that we're in. So what we're looking at is why we care and how to make it work. That's how behaviour change works. So people need to see something that they're motivated by, which of course is our oceans, and then also see that it is possible that this challenge has been overcome by local people, and they kind of, you know, lay it all out for you. So as hubs and all these people collecting this data, this might be something that you're interested in doing as well. And so this is one of the pieces of information that we give to the businesses when we first go out there. A lot of them say, oh, you know, I recycle, it's okay. And so there's actually 9 other things that you can do before recycling, and we're also seeing a little bit more of this, oh, but I've got compostable cups as well, and that's still number 9 on the list. Obviously you guys probably are all across this, but reducing is the first thing to do, but it always surprises me how much businesses aren't aware that we've got to start here. Don't get too stuck on this, because if you design out the waste in the first place and design out the litter, then you're actually, you know, you're winning. You don't have to worry about recycling it. So this is a bit of our campaign. It's really a 3-step program, and we're really supporting everyone to BYO. So first of all, reward that behaviour. You know, kit cups have been around for a while, but there's other types of BYO now, such as containers. If you don't have a customer bringing their own, then having alternatives, paper, things like that. And then also having other reusables on the ready. So having a mug library or a boomerang bag box, having a water refill station, all these things that you can do to really promote reusables in your business. So go and chat to your local businesses. I won't go into too much detail on our step-by-step guide for each type of plastic, but the reason why I've just put these in there is because I wanted to highlight that it really is, you need to set goals, and you need to just work through each item one by one, and it's really the same strategy, you just roll it out each time. So try to reduce first, then you know, try to encourage reusables, and then have some kind of alternative if you don't have a reusable system in place. Similar with the bags, you know, getting the businesses to ask their customers, did they bring their own bag? Just that little thing can remind people. Putting up signs, did you bring your own cup? We offer a discount. And then, yeah, having a mug library. Similar with water bottles. This one, I find that a lot of people say, oh, but we make so much money on the water bottles. And I've just found myself a little bit lately just saying, well, I think, you know, you have to realise that you're profiting off the planet. These water bottles, each one takes 3 bottles of water to create. We're in a drought right now. We can't afford to be doing that. So I think, you know, sometimes you have to say how it is. And also people think that they're drinking clean water, but they're actually drinking water that contains microplastics because of the fact of how the bottles are made. So, you know, there's definitely getting people's head around all this stuff is really important, I think, why they're doing it. So our resources are there to go, okay, here's the step-by-step process, set a goal. What do you want to do? Start with straws. Straws are the easy one. Start telling stories about how it is important to you as a manager, as a community member, if you're going and talking to these businesses, and show them how and why. Also go in there with a bit of empathy, because sometimes these businesses have just been doing it this way for a long time, and it's hard for them to imagine doing something any different. Behaviour change is sometimes a slow process. So if you can not go in there straight away and say you must do this, and kind of accept the fact that they're in a hard situation, and that can really help build that relationship, and then you might be listened to a little bit better with your solutions. And then as a community, if you're going out there and trying to create this change, make sure you celebrate and keep going by having little celebrations along the way. Little wins, they might not seem like much, but they're really important to keep the community going. So this is kind of what I've gone into a few businesses with, to help them come up with goals, school canteens as well, knowing who your target is as well. So in different cases, you might design a campaign that's slightly different depending on who your target is. Building your story. This is really important, and I think this is why the data is important too, because that data tells the story of your local community. It tells something that is ground truth for them. So go back to your reason why. Have the facts in there, but also talk about what you love, your passion, because that is contagious. People will see how much you care about these beautiful cephalopods and everything else in this picture, and they will be inspired by what you're saying. And then also show how you made the change. So here's a little bit of a story that I've got to share. As the Strawklers, we went out and found an octopus with these straws in its lair and hundreds of other straws. And so a friend of mine decided to set up a weekly straw call to collect the straws. And then with that data, I think we got 2,000 one summer. We went out and chatted to businesses and convinced 40 businesses on the Northern Beaches to ditch plastic straws. So that is really important, that story, to be able to share, because we can all make a difference in our own backyards with this data. So another thing that I try and get people to do in workshops is actually have a go at writing down your story, and then practice telling it, and practice listening, and practice giving feedback. So if you're, maybe you've done this before, but you haven't practiced it on a shop owner before, so try and get a group together where you can role play this out before you go out to a shop for the first time, because then you've at least had a practice, and also you can get feedback on that and improve it. And then you've also got like a community of people who know you're going to go out there and do it, so you can debrief with them afterwards and come back and say, oh, how did that go? Oh, they kicked me out of the shop, or they were lovely and they wanted to make a change. And so, yeah, having people that you do this work with is really important. And then, yeah, the celebrations, as I mentioned, there's so many ways to celebrate. Have a movie night. 2040 is a great positive movie that you can share with people. And also the Peloton Against Plastic is a really great one. Very positive. Doesn't seem like it's going to be positive at first, because it's a lot of plastic in Southeast Asia, but it is a beautiful story. They go and look at all the cafes in that area that are trying to make changes. So, and yeah, it helps people keep going. It helps everyone connect, and get lots of energy from being out in nature. So definitely try and do some outdoor activities, like an AUSMAP survey, but also not just AUSMAP surveys, make it fun as well. Yeah, and so this is Narrabeen, and a little quote that I just like to leave you with is, do the best you can, and then when you know better, do better. So we're all on a journey, and that's something I also like to share with the businesses. Sometimes they just feel so ashamed of where we're at right now, and so we just have to get started and keep doing better. So don't let perfect get in the way of good. Just get started, basically. So yeah, I think that was it from our slides. Yeah.
Okay, well done.
Very good. So we've got time for some questions, and I noted some down that were coming through the chat line already, so I'll just answer some of those, and then Michelle might be able to, or if there's any others that come through. So one of the questions was, and I'm not sure if it's been answered, but can you upload the data online, or will you be able to upload the data online at some point? A simple answer is no, directly to the web page. We'll have to, what we need is to verify any data that comes in. So part of AUSMAP is this check and balance of you collecting the data and us checking that it's all good. And so that's an important step for the quality of the program. And so that unfortunately is not going to happen. There might be an app one day that might be easier to loading the data up, but it'll never go straight to the database. It'll always come to us to vet it before then. Another question was around fibres and how to identify fibres, I think from Claire that was. So there's, I mean, obviously there's photo guides, and sometimes it's hard. Fibres are difficult to spot for the most part because they tend to be very fine, but there's, you know, how do you identify them? It's more often than not, we don't get a lot of fibres, but some sites, as you saw in some of the data, do have predominance of fibres depending on the source. So if you are in any difficulties, what we say is put it in the sample. If you're not sure it's synthetic or organic, put it in anyway, and we check it. So even though you fill in the data sheets, we check that. And that's important that you fill in those data sheets, because then we get to see how well you're doing at it and whether we need to tweak the methods. So, and I should say that most of the data that has come in is quite accurate. There's probably only about, on average, 5 to 10% error. And so it's, you know, congratulations, yeah, to all you guys for doing that. So, which is good. You know, anything in science with under 10% error is acceptable. Susan had a question about doing something up on the Central Coast. So there is a hub at Rumballara EEC. So there's groups are in your local area there, but I think Kylie might have said that she'd be in contact. Other people which might not have a hub, and I think Molly from Tassie said that she might have lost contact with people there, and so they're, we can contact you back up if you send us emails.
Also, just one thing while we're talking about hubs, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
We are in the process of having a map put up on our website. We're just finalising that, which will have all the hubs around Australia marked out with a link. So Glenn at Observatory Hill, Tony at the CEC, Michael up in Boyne Island, and so they'll have a link. So Susan, you'll be able to then go, this is my closest link to a hub. Not all, yeah. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. And Glenn, you asked a question about Queensland data, because in the presentation I give to the students, I mentioned some high loads in Queensland. That was actually pre-AUSMAP data. That was all research data that I'd collected. It doesn't go in, it hasn't gone into the AUSMAP database because it was done slightly differently, and we wanted to be consistent with the data being collected. So those beaches that were high in Queensland haven't been sampled in the AUSMAP style, but so Michael or anyone up and around the Yeppoon area, you can get up to those northern beaches there. There's some hot spots there that need to be sampled for AUSMAP. So, any questions from you guys? We're happy to take any more questions while you're here. Type away or anything at all.
Can I just ask, Scott, about the macroplastics? Michelle was mentioning earlier about the relationship. Should we be keeping those when we sample on Chowder Bay as well?
If it's collected, I know a lot of that hasn't been collected, Glenn, when the school groups, it still needs to be collected from that transect area. So if it's a general cleanup, we'll say no. But if it's collected in that transect area, yes, we'll take that as well, please.
So, can you hear me?
Yep, Robbie?
Yeah. Well, Bill organised so that the macroplastic data that we sent to Tangaroa had a code tag on it, so that anything that we sampled in that transect that was macro came with us in the correct. Bill could highlight that for us. We just added the code to it from our sample and we photograph it, and that seems to be adequate.
Yeah, that's fine, because Tangaroa is a partner with us, and so we want actually the data to go to Tangaroa, but we also say for us, because it's hard to get the data back out. So if you're taking your own photos of the sheet or whatever, then we only really need the data sheets, not the actual plastic themselves or the samples themselves, although happy to take that as well. So yeah, if you can send to both, that would be great. That would be the best.
There was a question about the Yeppoon hotspots.
Yeah, so Paul asked about Yeppoon hotspots. It's actually up at Five Rocks area, just north of Yeppoon, I suppose it is. It's a unique spot on the Queensland coast where there's deep water that comes in, and so and the kind of the position of the beach means it collects a lot of rubbish. Paul, was that?
Hello. I'm not sure if can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi everyone. So two things. The first one is on the microplastics. You were showing with Newcastle University and the sort of contaminant, the heavy metals and other toxins that are associated with those microplastics. It's frequently asked at the community that I work with, like, what are there specific types of plastic that attract different toxins? And I actually don't know that. So from the data that Newcastle have found, are like fragmented plastics normally holding on to some different type of hormone disruptor or something versus a polystyrene bead to a nurdle?
Yes, is the simple answer to that. So different plastic types, different polymer types definitely absorb, but it's how it's made as well. It's how long it's been in the water. So it's a bit more complex than that. So something that's been in the water a long time will have some fouling on it, some bacterial growth, a microfilm, and so that tends to accumulate more than like a new bit. If we were looking at each bit of plastic and it was newly out there, yes, they definitely absorb differently to start with, but then there's these other factors about how long they've been there, where they've moved through. Because this data is also being used as part of the student's PhD thesis, she hasn't got to that kind of nuanced analysis yet to give you that information, but we hope to have that in the future, yes. Okay.
And then the second question was to do with more on the business engagement and sort of community work. So you're talking about getting a survey together to sort of quantify how our successes within our local communities. Is that right? Was I understanding that correctly?
Michelle can answer that.
Yes, that's right, Ali. We are wanting to try and quantify as best as we can any behavioural change of people, or gauge what their sort of knowledge or experience is in this area at either a community event or more so a community event, because you're going to capture people that are there that are maybe a little bit interested, but people that come to the training are really interested in the program, and then a month on, so to see if that what we've explained to them and demonstrated to them has made any changes in their life as well. So that's what we're working on towards that at the moment.
So as far as the volunteer sign-on sheet go, and then you just get them to do that, and then we'll just, as a AUSMAP, at sort of either yours or Kylie's level or something, we'll then just email those volleys out and ask them on site on the day.
Yes, that's we're not sure whether it'll be an iPad type thing or whether it'll be a handwritten type form, where we're just working on that now. So we'll get back to you on that. And we'll email that out to all the people involved, more so the hubs initially, all those people that are really involved, to try and gauge some of that interest and see who'd be interested. It might be some of the teachers, it might be some of the students, but then certainly some of the community members as well.
Great.
There's a question from Joe Larkin.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. So did you say that we can send through to you what we pick up, the micro, within the transect as well? Because we've just been sending the 3 quadrats to you.
No, that was the macro, Joe.
Okay.
So only the macro is picked up within that broader, 50-metre transects.
So should we send that to you?
If you got it, if you record it on the data sheet, it's simpler to send.
Yeah, okay.
Rather than send us the whole sample, but
okay, so
the amount of time you have.
Because within that transect, we've picked up, it's nearly all micro in the transect. There isn't very much macro.
Yeah.
But there's loads of micro. So we've had one person in the rest of the place picking up all the pellets and the foam and
that's that's great. It's a great effort, but that's
you don't want that.
We don't need that. It's okay. If you're spending more time, do more quadrats is what we say. The 3 is a bare minimum. So if you can do 4 or 5 or 6 or 10.
Then we would be picking it all up. So that's okay. Thanks very much.
No,
that's good.
Because weren't you saying as well that researcher from Newcastle needed sometimes bigger samples to get the sample through, like the
analysis?
Yeah, the analysis that she's doing.
Yeah, so sometimes, we're not going to get some of that chemistry data from all sites, because we need to extract the chemicals off the plastic. You need something like 100 bits of plastic. And at the moment, to get back to Ali's question, is they've just been lumped together and a general extraction. So they're not being looked at individually by different types. For the large sites like West Lakes or somewhere in Sydney Harbour where we're getting thousands, we can do that. But for the smaller sites where there's just a few, so if that is something, if you can pick up other bits of plastic within the transects, but not, you leave it as a separate, maybe label it for chemical analysis, then maybe we could use that in that regard. But if you're doing that, it's might as well just do an extra quadrat or 2.
Yeah, we didn't think of doing that. That's excellent.
Okay, great. Anyone else? Anyone kind of struggling to have any issues around the sampling approach? Is it a time factor? Is it the method, or is it the analysis? If anyone has any thoughts, we'd be open to discussing those.
Just on the Manny Cove, on the straw cores. So we typically will always run out of time to be able to do either sorting out of the three. We only really get down to 3 quadrats, like as in 3 transects each time, and then sample sites, and then most of the time we can't even really get through more than 1 of those to actually sort it. But as I've spoken to you about it before, it seems to be that your girls are pretty good. They're used to it now, of having quite a heavy organic matter in there. I don't know what other people find, but also then the macro doesn't really get done for us. But yeah, but I mean, it's a struggle. Like I can't get it down less than 2 hours. Like that's the minimum I can do. By the time you've introduced AUSMAP, got the people ready, laid out the transect line, taken the samples. I don't know if anyone else has got a speedier way of doing it. But yeah,
I agree. I think Manly in particular, West Lakes, there's certain sites where we're getting a lot of organic matter, and that slows that whole process down. And so the time to do it is restricted. So understand that. That's why we say bottle it up. Just send us your whole quadrat unprocessed if there's. So there is that option.
Yeah. Particularly in Sydney there, Ali, just 1 transect, 3 quadrats, and if you have to, that's an easy fix that you can just gather up the whole quadrat load and hand it all over to Scott and his team.
I mean, they want to go through it, like the volleys want to go. And
So
get them to maybe go through
an hour and a half to just go through the one.
Yeah.
But you
possibly go through 1 quadrat and bottle up the other 2 then. So that you're at least doing 1, and even if you're not confident that they have completed that to the best of their ability or the best of what you can see, just gather it all up and bottle it all up and get Scott to check.
I have done that on quite a few occasions. I've let them just go through it and identify things, and then discreetly put all of it back in the
Exactly. And that's what Robbie had said. He said, Robbie from Living Oceans there, Robbie and Bill had said that, it's hard when people, as much as you don't want there to be microplastic, you almost want to showcase microplastic there. So that, we've been in that many times where it's like a bit of a letdown that people aren't finding lots of microplastic, even though we're like, well, that's fantastic. But, when you've done it a couple of times, keep a stash in your pocket, and then I sort of throw it in the sample once you've gone through everything, so that people can actually see what they're looking for. And that sort of satisfies that need of wanting to see it, but you're still collecting the data as you should be collecting it. So.
Yeah. We've got a question from Karen that says, how do you avoid contamination via seawater, either during the sieving process or when floating the microparticles? That's a good question, Karen. You should be looking, and this is a common thing we find in Sydney Harbour when we're trying to do it, is there's often microplastics in your bucket of water that you're collecting to sieve. So you actually have to pre-check it beforehand, and we're often taking handfuls of water out, scooping out the floating microplastics. So you're visually looking in that bucket and then pouring it into the sieve. You're right, that can add some contaminants, and the same when floating it. So any seawater that you get needs to be checked that there's no plastics in there.
And Joe has another question.
Another question from Joe.
I was just going to add that we also wanted to see how many we'd collected, and so we counted 1 lot, 1 transect, and That was enough. That was satisfied us, and the rest we're sending through to you now to do the counting.
Yeah, but Joe, yours are in the several thousands. That's understandable. That's for sure. So,
Especially the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's completely understandable. I think you get enough of a fix of microplastic in your loads, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I will jump in there. It is we're overdue our time, and I don't want to keep anyone's time. If you've got any more questions, we'd love to answer those. We'll save this group chat, as well as Alicia's been kind enough to record it for us. But from an AUSMAP point of view, I'd just like to say again, thank you to everyone who's attended tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time out, and Alicia for organising. Yeah, no worries, Alison. She just said missed the first hour, but that's all good. You'll be able to catch up. And like I said, to all you that are continuing to collect data for us, on a regular basis, we thank you. I mean, it really is turning into a wonderful program that's getting quite a lot of international interest now. So we're really excited to see where this goes. And you're all part of the founding part of AUSMAP, which is really, really exciting. So thank you, everyone. And to and hang on, I've been sipping away at mine. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Kylie's back. Hey, Kylie. While Kylie is here, I would personally, I'm going to cry. Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, God.
God, I'm hopeless. I'd just like to say thank you to my team. So cheers. I'm terrible. God.
Stop it.
Cheers. Cheers. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
I'm leaving.